Namaskar and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology, debunking mythology. And Sat means truth, Logos means a study or science, Sattology means the science of truth, a study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which comes from the root Sanskrit word myth, which means a fake lie imagination. So mythology means a science or study of fake lie or imagination. It is always our endeavor to bring all aspects of Vedic sciences, Vedic studies on the screen. And for your information, and believe me, it's so vast. I am not alone enough to decipher it or speak on it. You need multiple viewpoints. And believe me, a human being cannot digest multiple viewpoints because everyone is born with their own karma. Everyone looks at something based on their own karma. That's why we need guidance from spiritual parampara, and that is traditions, and also from a guru. And that's why you need that. So importance of guru cannot be ruled out. I have a very, very special guest today. He is the maternal grandson of a very big personality in the Indian tradition. And I happened to visit his home a couple of years back, and I remembered everything. He sounded very special to me, looked very special to me. And luckily we have him here. So without delay, let us welcome Sri Sastry Yanamandra. Namaskar, Shastri ji.
Namaskar, Aditya ji. Thank you very much for having me today.
When I met you first time, I could guess, just by your behavior and the way you're talking, I could immediately understood that there's something special about this person. And I meet many people. I don't say like this for everyone. So Shastri, a little bit tell about yourself before we talk about your maternal grandfather.
I live in the Washington, D.C. area, as you know, Aditya ji. I have been here since 1987. I work in the IT space. I'm an IT consultant. So there isn't too much to tell about me because I'm not the subject of today's discussion, but I'm in the IT domain and have lived in Maryland since 1987.
No, there's a lot to talk about you because of the family that you come from. And it shows off. It shows off also because the knowledge stays in the traditions and the family, and it stays there. So little bit, when we start speaking about your relationship with Kota Venkatachelam, His Holiness Kota Venkatachelam. So what is your view? And what is your experience? Did you meet him anytime?
And sadly, no. As you know, he became Sankaracharya of the Sringeri Parampara. And then after he did that, he could not live at home with the family. And so I was born in August of 1959. And Swamiji attained Siddhi in November of 1959 when I was about 4 months old. So I don't remember ever meeting him.
And so... you must have met your. So, what was his impact on your mother and your family, maternal family? Like, because living in the house of Sankaracharya, which is it is generally said, 21 generations before and 21 generations after get freedom from karma bandhan by when such a great personality is born.
Yes.
So, there must be some deep impact on the family connected.
Oh, yes. Yes, and it was quite obvious when I used to go to Vijayawada, where my maternal grandfather's house is. It was fairly religious, God-fearing family that was adopted tradition, and you could see. I used to live in New Delhi at the time. Throughout my childhood, because my father used to work there, and you could see the stark difference between a metropolitan city and adoption of tradition.
I can see that. And Delhi is is one of the most, I could say, cosmopolitan city of the India. Actually, it is the most because it has people from all over the India, especially. So, Shastri ji, before you start the presentation, can you tell us a little bit more about your mother, and on the mother's side, like what impact she had l- being a daughter to such a great personality?
It's essentially the tradition that lives on, that it is hard to find in big cities, and it has had an impact on me over the years. In fact, I used to have three uncles. They're not alive now, but my oldest uncle started this tradition of preserving these books after Swamiji's Siddhi. And then later on, my youngest uncle, Dr. Kota Venkatachelam Sastry, whose name you find on the books, took over, and he has kept the tradition alive for 60 years. And that is how we are able to revive these books. These books went out of print 70 years ago. The last book was published in 1957. And right now, what we are trying to do is we are republishing the entire set of 24 books. So far, we have published 6 books, and I'm working on the 7th one. And all of this was possible because my uncle was a good custodian of these books for 60 years.
No, I received those books last week when you sent me, and I gone through the pages. Beautifully written books. I mean, I'm a writer myself, but I could appreciate the kind of clarity that your His Holiness wrote over there. So let us get started, and we'll talk all about your maternal grandfather, great grandfather, all about him today. So, and then we'll focus on the other things in subsequent shows. So you can share your slides and we can get started.
So yes, can you see my screen, sir?
Yes, we can see that. We can see that. Yes.
Very good. So what I have titled this presentation is the reconstruction of Indic chronology from Shruti and Smriti. And you can see the third line is the 20th century Sankaracharya of the Sringeri Parampara. I thought this was important because these days the tendency is to try and depend on archaeology, to depend on astronomy, and not give adequate importance to what the actual texts say. So I believe, and as Panditji believed, that texts must be the primary source of information, and that astronomy and archaeology, prashastis, inscriptions, epigraphs, these can be used to corroborate evidence, just like you can use coins also to corroborate the textual evidence.
Yeah, please continue. Please continue. And then, yeah.
Yes, so as you can see from this slide, he was born in 1885 and attained Siddhi in 1959. And he was a 20th century Shankaracharya of the Sringeri Parampara. So now you can see that based on that, he was a traditional scholar. So this is the insider's perspective, a practitioner's perspective, and a traditional scholar's perspective. And he was well grounded in Shruti and Smriti. And of course, that also means the Puranas and the Itihasas. Now, when in 1885, you can see he was a contemporary of Max Miller. Now, Max Miller, as you may recall, died in 1900. So there was a 15-year overlap between the two. But by the time he was about 23, he began to realize that the history being taught in India was distorted. and he was shocked. So he was outraged, being a traditionalist, he was outraged at the distortions, and he began his research into trying to correct those distortions. And he spent 40 years from 1908 to 1948, and he published about 24 books that documented all of his findings. And what he did was actually reconstruct chronology of Bharatiya Itihasa from 3138 BC to 1193 AD. And our history is well documented from 1193, so that is why he stopped at 1193. And in having done all this research work, he was conferred many titles for his work, the most prominent one being Bhaskara. So you can see from the title itself that it is suggesting that he is the rising sun of Indian history, and which is what I have used on my cover slide. This was designed by my maternal uncle, and so this reflects Bharata Charitra Bhaskara. This Bhaskara is the sun. Each ray is one of the dates that he was able to re-establish, and that is how he was known. And this title is also on his books. Now, he was initiated by the Sankaracharya of Sringeri. There's a picture on the right, the Mahaswami of Sringeri, Chidananda Nrsimha Bharati Jagadguru, who initiated Panditji as the Pitadipati of the Abhinava Virupaksha Pitam. And since then, in his Turiya Ashrama, he was known as Jagadguru Shankaracharya Advayananda Sankarabharati Swami. Now, Panditji's methodology in doing his research was multidisciplinary in nature, even though he relied heavily on ancient texts as the primary evidence. He believed that Puranas and Itihasas are a source of history, but he also used Prashastis, inscriptions, and archaeological findings to corroborate what he found. And he also felt that legends and folklore are also valid sources to draw information from, because that represents a civilizational memory. He was an active participant in conferences, and I've listed over here some of the papers that he has presented over time. You can see one that he has presented in 1951 in Jaipur about the the Greek synchronism introduced in Indic Chronology. In 1953, he wrote a paper, Predetermined Plot in Indic Chronology. And then there are several others, and I've included a few here as examples. Beyond that, he was an active member and a contributor of the Andhra Historical Research Society, which is located in Rajahmundry. And this historical society is primarily a clearinghouse where peer scholars get together, present their findings, they peer review each other's works. They also may disagree with one another, and that's also where they refute disagreements with evidence to make their points. Now, given that this was his methodology, his approach to reconstructing Indian chronology was to first establish the correct sheet anchor. And in his case, he identified the Mahabharata war as the sheet anchor because that is the date on which all other dates are dependent. And so if the date of the Mahabharata war can be established, then all the other dates sort of fall into place and you have a complete chronology. Now, so having established the Mahabharata war as the sheet anchor, his methodology and approach included the research of long-lived kingdoms, primarily Hastinapur, Magadha, Ayodhya, Kashmir, and Nepal, because all of these kingdoms existed from before the Mahabharata war. Now, Hastinapur ended soon after the war, but Magadha, Ayodhya, Kashmir, Nepal continued for a much, much longer time. and the Kashmir and Nepal as civilizational states still exist today. So by following these genealogies, you're able to correlate, corroborate historic personalities from different dynasties, and then there are multiple sources of information that's available to establish their dates. And so validation occurs when you use this methodology. So, and then, of course, finally, he corroborated what he found in ancient texts with the contemporary literature, meaning Buddhist and Jain literature, because Buddha was a personality that was written about heavily in Jain literature as well as in Buddhist literature. So that was another source from which information could be corroborated, from inscriptions, from coins, prashastis, as well as from foreign sources, because India was the seat of learning of human civilization in olden days. And this attracted foreign travelers to India to learn in Indian universities. But more recently, in the recent times, about 1,000 years, 1,500, 1,100 years ago, Al-Biruni, who was a Persian scholar, visited India, and he actually wrote a book about India and about his stay in India. And in that, he... Yes, sir.
Your presentation is not moving down. It's still on the first slide. Okay. Maybe you can show the second slide also a little bit. Yeah, now it is showing. Okay. Perfect. And then which slide you are on right now? Before that also you have one more slide?
No, this is where I began.
Okay. Perfect. Please continue now. And then yes.
Yes, and then I had explained his methodology, that his primary reliance was on texts as primary evidence, although he did use other sources to corroborate his findings. He was an active participant in conferences, and here I list some of the papers that he's presented over the years at different conferences. These are back in 1951 to 53. He was also an active member and a contributor of this Andhra Historical Society in Rajahmundry, which is a clearinghouse for peer scholars who are researching history. This is where he presented his discoveries for peer review. He defended his assertions, and he refuted disagreements with his evidence. So given this methodology, his approach was to first establish the correct sheet anchor, which he believed was the Mahabharata war. The reason is our Puranas have lists of kings from different dynasties, and all of these are stated with respect to the Mahabharata war. So since all those dates use the Mahabharata war as the starting point, the chronology falls into place once you establish the date of the Mahabharata war itself. And once you establish that, then the long-lived dynasties that existed from before the Mahabharata war are Hastinapur, Magadha, Ayodhya, Kashmir, and Nepal. So just following these dynasties and the kings that ruled those dynasties is a good way to correlate dates across genealogies and across multiple sources. So my example here was that Buddha was from the Ayodhya Ikshvaku dynasty. And Buddha, of course, having started a new following and a faith for himself, was written about in Buddhist texts. He was also written about in Jain texts. And so we have Jain and Buddhist texts that provide information that we can use to correlate and validate dates that we find in our Puranas. And of course, finally, he did corroborate his findings with contemporary literature, as I mentioned, with inscriptions, with coins, prashastis, as well as with foreign sources. And I was quoting Al-Biruni here. Al-Biruni, who visited India, wrote a book on his stay in India, and he provides some dates, and he provides some of his experiences that help corroborate the dates that we find in our own sources. So in summary, his works actually provide a complete framework because he identifies most of the distortions and the people who made those distortions in his books. So first he identifies those, and then the books, the remainder of the books present a reconstructed chronology from primary sources from 3138 BC to 1193 AD. Now, these two dates are significant because 3138 BC is what he established as the date of the Mahabharata war, and 1193 AD is where he stopped because that is, from that point forward, our chronology and history is well documented, and so he decided to stop at that point. Now, in doing so, he completely reconciles several provincial sources of Bharatiya Itihasa, and I have listed some points over here. One is the history of Magadha from the Puranas. Then the history of Nepal, and this is from the Nepal Rajavamsavali. So the Nepal Rajavamsavali is a book that actually documents the chronology of Nepal. And Nepal is a very old civilization and has existed from 4159 BC to the 18th century AD. So, and then the third source is the history of Kashmir. And Kashmir existed from 3450 BC, uses the Saptarishi Laukikabda or Kashmir Abda eras, so which is different from the Mahabharata war. And this, the primary source of Kashmir history is from a book called the Rajatarangini, written by Kalhana. And then, of course, Buddhist and Jain texts, as I've already mentioned. Now, as he was researching and corroborating dates across Nepal history and Kashmir history, he noticed distortions even in those texts. The Nepal Rajavamsavali, Kalhana's Rajatarangini. For example, in Rajatarangini, there were 4 slokas that he identified and said that these could not have been written by Kalhana. Because if you believe those slokas, then they assert that the Pandavas were alive in 653 Kali, meaning 653 years after the Kali Yuga began, the Pandavas were alive, is what these 4 slokas assert. And so this was an example of a distortion that he was able to identify. And the good thing is, he has used numerous references, and he has identified each of those references, the text, the chapter, and the sloka. And the advantage of this approach is that even if one disagrees with his conclusions, the references are all indicated over here. So it's easy for someone to conduct a parallel research effort using these references and see whether they can come up with conclusions that agree with his or disagree. Another little known fact is that he was the earliest to point out, to debunk the Aryan invasion theory, and he came up with an out-of-India migrations, not a theory, he actually found evidence. He found evidence of migrations out of India populating the globe. And this was one of his original contributions on the out-of-India migrations. Now, as I have mentioned, he considered Puranas as a source of historical information. There is a misperception, a misconception that Puranas do not contain historical information. That is not true. So the word Purana means Purapi Navaha, meaning though old, it is always new. Now, there are 2 categories of Puranas, the Mahapuranas and the Upapuranas. The Mahapuranas, a text is considered a Mahapurana if it meets 10 specific characteristics called the Dasa Lakshana. Dasa for 10, Lakshana means characteristics. So Dasa Lakshana, a Mahapurana must meet these 10 characteristics to be called a Mahapurana. The Upapuranas must meet 5 characteristics, which are called the Panchalakshana. So the Panchalakshana are common to Upapuranas as well as Mahapuranas. So these Panchalakshana are listed in below. The Sarga, Pratisarga, Manvantara, Vamsa, and Vamsanacharita. So the section called Sarga describes the process of Srishti. And the second section called Pratisarga describes the destruction at the end of Srishti. The third is Manvantara, which talks about the cosmic units of time. And the fourth and fifth, the Vamsa, contains genealogies of kings and gotras from their founding rishis. And Vamsanacharita provides details about significant historical personalities, events surrounding them, and their major achievements. And so chronologies can be reconstructed from Vamsa and Vamsanacharita. So Adiji shall...
Yes, thank you so much. I think we'll stop here. We'll make it a part 2 for people to view that. And you said something very important here about Purana, because most of the researchers on the chronology, they sometimes quote Purana and sometimes they don't quote Purana. And so, and you are saying it that Purana, like Bhagavad Purana, has got the list of all the kings towards the end. One thing is very striking: all the acharyas have extensively quoted Purana. Extensively, Bhagavad Purana has been the book of quotation by Sri Ramanujacharya, by Sankaracharya, by all the original. Madhvacharya has quoted a lot, and including in the East, we have Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu quoted a lot from Bhagavad Purana. So this is very interesting information you give, that again, that Puran, what is Puran and why Puran has been used. So do you have any more information on which Puran have been extensively quoted by different acharyas, especially Sankaracharya Kota Venkatachelam?
I can speak for my grandfather, Panditji.
Yes.
And he did not rely on a single Purana as such. He has quoted extensively from the Bhagavad Purana, but then there are other corroborating evidence that he required that he found in other Puranas. So when you get to concepts like the path of the Saptarishi Mandala, so the Saptarishi Mandala is actually described in the Matsya Purana. So he quotes from the Matsya Purana over there. So when we talk about migrations out of India and we talk about Dasyus, Yavanas, there is a misconception that Yavanas were Greeks, that they came to India from Greece, which is not true. What Panditji shows is that Yavana is a Sanskrit word that was known from the times of Manusmriti. And he shows and quotes from different sources, including the Vishnu Purana and the Harivamsa Purana. So in summary, I don't think he relied only on the Bhagavad Purana, although that is probably a very important one. But he did find information in other Puranas as well that helped to validate and corroborate his findings.
See, another thing which comes to the mind is that when we talk about the influences of the impact of gurus from South India had on North India, because all the avatars have appeared near the Ganga or Yamuna. Most of the avatars are there, or Himalayas, but all the acharyas have come from South India. You look at any parampara, Madhvacharya, Sri Ramanujacharya, all the acharyas, and they had the major pitha in North India. And so people who divide India on the basis of North and South, they don't realize that our acharyas have come from South India, most of them original thoughts. And even if you look at the presence of, and also some from Bengal, but most of the original acharyas are from South India. What do you have to say on that?
Yes, I do notice that myself. Now people talk about, well, in modern times, people have accused India of not being a country, not being a civilization, not having a history, which is not true, because the concept of Bharat was known from ancient times. In fact, when Yudhishthira in the Mahabharata war, before the war, he actually does a Rajasuya Yagam, the horse sacrifice. And doing a horse sacrifice without opposition means that he becomes a Chakravarti, not a king, but a Chakravarti. Chakravarti of Bharat. So the concept of Bharat has been known for a long time. In fact, it's in the name Mahabharata itself. It's the Great War of Bharat. In fact, if you go even further, there have been other Chakravartis before Yudhishthira that became the emperors of Bharat. So along those lines, even coming to modern times, Adi Sankaracharya, even though he was born in Kaladi in Kerala, south of India, took sannyas, became a student of Govind Bhagavatpada in Amarakanta near Ujjain, and then goes to his Paramaguru in Badrik Ashram in the north. And he is the student of his Paramaguru Gaudapadacharya for about 4 years. And after that, he starts this Padayatra and covers all of Bharat 3 times in his lifetime, in his short lifetime of 32 years. So the concept of Bharat has existed from very, very ancient times. And of course, there were different seats of learning. Now, Ujjain was a great center for learning mathematics and astronomy. That's where most of our astronomers have come from, like Kalidasa, Varahamihira, and so on and so forth. So I think the north has seen a lot of invasions. Mathas have been destroyed, temples have been destroyed, traditions have been destroyed, lineages have been destroyed. And perhaps it's because of that we don't find mathas as strong as we find them in South India, Adityaji.
That leads to me my next question, and you can choose to ignore it if you want to. But we see the conversions are maximum in South India. How is that? Like when all the acharyas are from there, but we see the conversion maximum over there.
Yes, because it is the acharyas that are holding the tradition and the people together. And so the easiest way to break a civilization is to break up anything that binds and pulls people together. So, in fact, you may have noticed that they were attacking deras in Punjab before this. So, anytime they find a power center, whether it's on social lines or religious lines, that becomes the first target of attack.
So, Shastriji, like to carry on the legacy of Pandit Kota Venkatachelam, now, when we say that the conversions are happening, people are easily getting convinced on something which is temporary, which is not permanent. And people are converting to that kind of mindset where the Vedic culture talks about life after life following a tradition. It's, you are, in that family, and now you are carrying forward the tradition, even in Washington, D.C. So why is that people from South India are getting converted in such large numbers? Is there some reason, or movies are the reason, or the media is the reason?
Actually, it's many things put together. It's not just one thing. In fact, even in the 16th century, there was a Roberto di Nobili, who actually came to India with the support of the Vatican, settled in Tamil Nadu, learned Tamil and Sanskrit, and spoke it fluently. And he started wearing saffron robes, like a Pandit. And he could talk very fluently in Tamil and in Sanskrit. So he was considered a local scholar. But in his hand, he had a book called the Yesuveda and said this is the fifth Veda. And so a conversion attempt started in the 16th century and they have intensified. And then you've had different movements like Marxism and communism that brought in a lot of atheism. So if you look at Tamil Nadu, each state is slightly different. Tamil Nadu has become atheistic. If you look at their political parties, they're atheists. Whereas Kerala, you find a dominance in the south of the Christian influence. You find dominance of Muslim influence towards the north. So Kerala's story is a little different. The reason these are targeted is because that's where you have major religious centers. Like you have the in Karnataka, you've got Sringeri. In Tamil Nadu, you have Kanchipuram. You have all these major temples. Sri Ranganatha Swami, Sri Rangam, Tanjavur. So all these major religious seats of learning are becoming a target because that is what keeps people together. But over time, what you're finding is that is getting diluted based on political interference and the interference of other influences and other forces. And because of that, I think the end result is that the people are being drawn far away from their original beliefs and belief systems. And in a materialistic life where joint families are broken up into nuclear families, the people look for support somewhere. And so these people who try these conversion attempts try to provide that support to vulnerable people. And typically they try to attack the most vulnerable people. It's rare that they would try and convert you or me because we tend to ask questions. We tend to ask questions. We tend to look for confirmation that what they're saying is true, or we try to identify for ourselves what our beliefs are, what our value systems are. But people who are vulnerable and in a weak position fall easy victim, easy prey to money, to coercion, to other methods that are used in conversion.
And recently, someone committed suicide also.
That's true.
That's true. That kind of force, coercion. Now, is there any way that we, and we'll talk only about your maternal grandfather, we take his legacy to every town and village of Tamil Nadu and other areas, because he was the Sankaracharya, a very major mutt also, Singeri mutt. So we take his legacy forward in those areas. Is it possible today?
It is possible. I think one of the your program, what you are doing is wonderful. You provide a wonderful platform, and it is amazing as to how many people you have brought together through this platform. The sad thing is, we need a similar outreach in regional languages in every state in India. Until we can strengthen that and draw people together based on regional languages or otherwise, it's going to be difficult to counter the strong forces we are faced against.
That's a very good suggestion. I would dream of having a Sattology Tamil, Sattology Bangla, and Sattology Spanish channels also, if people get more interested. And I would welcome people to come and join.
In fact, today, if you look at Andhra Pradesh, of course, the language is Telugu. And you find at least 3 or 4 people, very prominent people who are delivering pravachans, and they are actually pulling the people together. So I would like to suggest that if somehow you could collaborate with them and vice versa, I think there would be a huge impact in Andhra Pradesh at least.
No, the great suggestion. I think nobody gave that suggestion earlier. So thank you for coming from you. And I would like to see, and I would like to invite all the viewers who would like to do that. And very simple to do that. Now, last question. Now, in the US, also we have a large group of people who follow Sringeri Mutt, and probably they will not be aware of the works of Pandit Kota Venkatachelam. So what do you say to them, that how they can get connected with Sringeri Mutt and their, because the teachings are the same. So one Shankaracharya and the next Shankaracharya, everybody carries forward a tradition. So teachings are the same, and it's always good to glorify the previous Acharya. And that's how you live on. And somehow the new mantra, the leftist mantra, is to that challenge the teachers. You do not become a good teacher by stepping on the head of the previous teacher. Otherwise it doesn't work out. The tradition don't work that way. So what is your advice to them who would like to carry forward this legacy in the US? Because the US has, I know many people personally who are connected to Sringeri Mutt. What is your message to them?
I think they do have an outpost in New Jersey. Sringeri has an outpost in New Jersey. They are becoming more and more popular. Earlier, people were not aware that this outpost existed, but I think they have to strengthen their outreach program, because there is a large number of people that really want to associate themselves with these kinds of outreach programs. But I think the institution has to make an effort, and maybe we can bridge that gap.
Thank you so much, Sastry ji, for coming on the show today and educating us on the legacy of your maternal grandfather. And also for people who are connecting to the show, please comment on the show and let us know your feedback. And if you are connected to Sringeri Mutt, then at least those followers should buy these books, which are 6 are available, 24, I think 18 are about to come. And they are all available on Amazon also now?
Not yet, but we're working on them.
Yeah, the 6 will be available on Amazon. And meanwhile, if you want to order them, any publisher in India is publishing them, or here in the US?
Well, no, actually, my uncle was handling all of these. So what I have some copies over here, some sets, but the bulk of them are in India. So people based in India, I can have my uncle's family ship it to them. Yeah. People who are based in the US, I can ship to them.
So please, if you want to get those books, you can text on the video, and I will send you the email where you can correspond with Sastry ji and get those books. Wonderful read and very nicely compiled. I personally have got them. I put it out on my Instagram. I put it out other places also. That is the best gift I love, someone sending me books. So thank you all for joining, and thank you for listening to this show. And this was the first. We'll have two more shows on this series where Sastry ji will answer more questions on His Holiness Pandit Kota Venkatachelam. Thank you.
Namaskar. Thank you, Aditya ji.